Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week, John, Shannon, Amanda, and I discuss the Rusty Blackbird. Amanda and I saw our first Rusty Blackbird in the wild a few months back. It was a pair of them, and so we wanted to talk to John and Shannon about it. We didn't realize that their population has been decimated recently. Rusty Blackbird is one of North America's most rapidly declining species. Their population has plunged somewhere between 85 and 99% over the past 40 years, which is so tragic, but we discuss what has been contributing to that. They really are an amazing looking bird too, so we were really excited that we had the chance to see one. We talk about some of the factors that have led to their decline, what makes them so cool, and then also answer a mailbag question on the big year. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. All right, well, should we get into the Rusty Blackbird?
Let's do Rusty Blackbird.
So before we get kind of into it, I wanted to tell just kind of a little backstory about why Amanda and I wanted to talk about Rusty Blackbird. And so we were out just at a friend's for lunch out in Barrington, and there was this forest preserve near their house, and we had our binoculars, and we just had this, we're like, let's just go for a walk and get some fresh air and do a little birding along the way. And not in with no intention of that we were going to see anything really exciting or something that we hadn't. I mean, this was a first for us. Maybe Rusty Blackbirds aren't the most exciting bird, but we were pretty psyched to see something that we hadn't seen before. And it just really for us made us appreciate until you get out there, you don't know what you're going to see. It's you can just putting yourself out there is really important because you're going to always see something that fascinates you or always something that gets you excited. And it's just taking the time to get out there is always worth it. So I don't know. We were really excited about that. And we, go ahead, John.
So where did you see the Rusty Blackbird? What was it doing?
Yeah. So we went through this, it was this really kind of diverse terrain where we were walking through, and we were walking through the woods, walking through kind of this prairie. And then we got to this area where there was kind of a little bit of flooding, swamp area. And so we didn't even really realize there was this pond and a dam, and then there was this area that was all kind of overflow. And so we got over there, and that's where we saw it was a pair of them. And we weren't even looking for a Rusty Blackbird. It took us, we kind of got home and did our research and then kind of put the pieces together that that's what it was. But it almost looked at first, before we got our binoculars on, it looked like a grackle and a cowbird, but we were that doesn't make any sense. But it had that, the one was very dark and had that bright eye. And then the other one had, kind of this brown coloration that was kind of all over, but it was kind of faded a little bit. So yeah, we waited to put that into eBird until we went back and did our research. And I feel that's another kind of thing that we've evolved on too, is not jumping to conclusions on things. I feel in the past we'll snap a picture of something, put it into Merlin, and it tells us something, and we're that's kind of weird. I can't tell you how many times we've been told that there was a brewer's blackbird, and we're I don't think we've never logged it because we're always we want to be sure, but I don't think Amanda and I have ever seen a brewer's blackbird.
So I will tell you, you've absolutely seen brewer's blackbird.
Oh,
really?
But it would have been it would have been out in Colorado.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. I believe that.
And so it's not that they don't occur in Illinois, because they do on occasion, brewers, but the two are the only members of the genus that they're in, and Brewers is a western bird, and Rusty is the eastern version.
Oh.
And so they kind of come together here. But Brewers goes around in these massive flocks, and then in the breeding season they tend to breed in kind of open country, and so you'll often see them around gas stations and hawking insects off of cars and stuff. And so you've almost I can pretty much guarantee you,
okay,
you've seen them.
I believe that.
That's hilarious.
Awesome.
Well, why does Merlin sometimes are they in Illinois ever, brewer's blackbirds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's in Illinois. It's interesting because there are probably more in Western Illinois as you get into more open country than there are in the Chicago area, for instance.
Okay.
It's hard for pictures to capture the actual sheen on the black, and that's why it's so easy for Merlin to mistake the two. So you have to see the sheen for the image things to the AI to actually separate them pretty easily. You could separate them by behavior. Your eyes are going to do a better job once you know what to look for than a picture will, because you can't capture all of the complexities of color in a picture.
But they're a real ID problem for birders, even good birders, especially in Illinois, where you have it's conceivable that you could have both. But what you saw in a forest is many, many times more likely to have been Rusty Blackbird.
Okay.
And because that's what they love. And I've always liked them, again, having grown up in the West and seen these big flocks of blue-eared blackbirds that come to southern Arizona in the winter and hang around feedlots and stuff like that. These are these birds, Rusty Blackbirds are these birds of just forest wetlands. And they breed up, and for a long time, nobody knew very much about their breeding biology. And the reason for that is their primary breeding range is up in central Canada over into Alaska. And they're breeding in these spruce bogs, which are not easy to get to, and there isn't a lot of, you can't drive to them very often. And so their breeding biology was really poorly known for a long time.
Yeah, if you look at some of the people who fairly recently have tried to study more about them on their breeding grounds, the accounts that they write for Audubon magazine or some of the bird things are like, there's no wonder this bird, we don't know anything about it. I've fallen in the water 15 times. I can't drive to where these birds are. I have to hike all over the place across this boggy stuff. My boots are ruined. I'm cold. I'm miserable. And these birds are super hard to study. Man.
So the other thing about them is their numbers have dropped an estimated 85 to 95% over the past 50 to 70 years. And the reasons for that are actually not determined and are probably the result of a lot of different factors. But it's crazy because those spruce bogs that they live in don't have there's no people around there to affect things.
But humans are destroying the environment and putting pollutants into the environment. So, that is one of the things, John's right, that environmental biologists talk about with respect to this bird, is that there's no one factor causing this decline, but there's a whole bunch of human-caused reasons for this bird to decline, including on their wintering grounds. So we're drying up the places that they live, and that's going to happen more and more as we warm the environment. You think, these things are hard because they're in wet environments and forests, but what happens to water when you warm it up? It goes away. Ponds go away. Rivers go away. So those bogs will not look like this when we keep warming the planet. And in fact, those polar environments like that are really changing rapidly as we warm the planet. So they're some of the most vulnerable habitats at the poles.
Yeah, so these birds will break up into pairs in the breeding grounds and breed in these spruce bogs. And then in the winter, the young and the adults will end up flocking up and migrating partially by themselves. So for instance, when the birds you saw in the forest, it's fairly common in the spring, for instance, to see groups of rusty blackbirds in these wetlands in around the Chicago area, in these forested wetlands. And there'll often be red-winged blackbirds with them because they move together to some extent. And in the wintering grounds, they winter with big blackbird roosts of brown-headed cowbirds and common grackles and red-winged blackbirds down in places like Louisiana. And in those areas, they're considered to be pests, and there have been efforts to actually kill large numbers of birds at blackbird roosts. And so that's another possible source of decline for these birds.
They're often poisoned because people don't want the birds, other kinds of blackbirds in their crops. But, the poison doesn't discriminate between the super declining Rusty Blackbird, and all the other blackbirds that you fear are eating your crops.
Wow.
So that's another decline, another reason for decline. Mercury poisoning is another reason. They found mercury in feathers in higher levels. So, that's another environmental pollutant that comes from coal burning power plants. For the most part, it goes into the mercury goes into the air and falls through rain, but then it gets changed into this methyl mercury, which is way, way, way worse than the normal mercury, which is bad enough. So microorganisms are creating a super pollutant that gets into the ground and then into the feathers of the birds.
Well, and this is something where there's good evidence from other species like ivory gull, which is a bird that basically breeds above the Arctic Circle, where they've looked at museum specimens from the 1800s and modern specimens and shown that mercury levels have gone up over the last 100 years or so. And so, yeah, Shannon's right. It just seems like there's an awful lot of factors that may be leading to this bird numerically dropping in dramatic numbers, even though in a lot of ways its behavioral biology would be one of the last things you might think would lead that to happen.
Except that it has the unfortunate idea it should be breeding in the highest latitudes in North America, which makes it vulnerable no matter how common you think it is, right? There was an important paper published in 1999 by a guy named Russ Greenberg and a colleague, Sam Droege, in conservation biology, and it's called On the Decline of the Rusty Blackbird. So you can go into the scientific literature if you want to read more about this. Unfortunately, Russ Greenberg is also dead, so we're getting into dead ornithologists world, but the importance of what they did outlasts their lifetime. And there's not very many things we do that you can say that about, because a lot of the science we do is fun and cute and quaint, and it's a part of a piece of a puzzle, but it's not that consequential in a grand scheme of things. But something like this paper is consequential and will outlast the science. So, I always tell people I could have done my dissertation in a few hours in the Pritzker lab in the Field Museum. I could have gathered all of that data. It took me several years. It was super hard, but now you could do it trivially in an afternoon.
Oh, wow.
So things change a lot. Now we're getting insight into whole genomes, as you learn about when you listen to the white-throated sparrow episode. There's lots of things that are happening, but some of these seminal papers will stand the test of time. You can go read Rachel Carson's book, and that's still...
Silent Spring.
Oh, Silent Spring, yeah. That still resonates now. You will not necessarily know that when that book was written if you read it without looking at the publication dates.
Well, and one of the things that paper did in a citizen science world is it highlighted to everybody that you could encourage the citizen science community. And so the Cornell Lab of Ornithology through eBird has put out special calls for trying to encourage birders to report Rusty Blackbird sightings so that they can actually get a better handle on the migratory patterns and where things are. And there's an army of people out there that can help gather data on that'll be really useful over the next 100 years to document what's happening with that bird.
So you didn't have any idea of those things when you saw that bird, and it sparked such an interest in you. It's little rusty feathers on the tertials, which are the closest wing feathers to the body. It just looks cool.
Yeah.
And it seemed like something you hadn't seen before. But if you add your observations with everyone else's, we can start understanding population declines of this bird and, hopefully use it to talk about how you might change environmental use patterns, what you do with coal plants to stop putting so much mercury into the air. Why do we need coal plants? Look what's happening when you warm the environment. Even common birds can be driven to almost extinction. So, these are happening in our lifetimes. This isn't a theoretical future or some past. This is happening right now.
But these birds are one thing I love about them is, again, you think of blackbirds like red-winged blackbird and common grackle, and you think of things that are out in the open and that you're seeing. And rusty blackbirds really fly under the radar, and they can be very quiet in these as they go along flipping leaves looking for invertebrates in these little pools on Chicago in migration. And, one of my favorite stories, which I think is completely anecdotal, is Dave Willard came into the museum one spring and said he had just had some rusty blackbirds when he does his walk around McCormick Place. And I'd never seen him at our house up in Evanston. And that afternoon I got home and I wanted to see what was moving around, and they moved pretty early in the spring. And I suddenly saw this couple of black birds in some of the trees around the street. And I pulled out my phone and I actually played Rusty Blackbird just to see what happened. And the minute I played it, this bird comes flying over and lands in the tree right in front of me. And it was like the first Rusty Blackbird I'd ever had at the house.
How cool.
I always say, like, that doesn't tell you anything about sort of how Rusty Blackbirds move north through the Chicago area at some point. But it's a wonderful bird in terms of how, like, when I lead bird tours, it's one of the things, if we're in Perkins Woods or Skokie Lagoons, I'm constantly looking on the ground in the wetlands to see if I can spot, like a leaf flying up or something. And, it's not inconceivable that could also be a common grackle, but like that's where you have to look for rusty blackbirds in spring in Chicago.
I think that bird is underrated from how pretty it is. So, the iridescence it has on its feathers. And I think that rusty color is just really beautiful, actually. These birds are really pretty. So, and its eye is so bright. So pay attention to them. They're quite spectacularly understated.
Well, and I think the key to that is they're basically here in spring and fall migration, and that's it. And sometimes there are birds that'll winter around here. They're wintering in the southern U.S., but certainly in the breeding season, they're so much farther north that you're only getting them while they're passing through. So there's this kind of window of opportunity you have to look for rusty blackbirds, and it's become one of these things where when I'm out in the early spring, it's definitely on my mind as I go through any given area that I should just keep an eye out for birds moving down low in these wetlands.
So, John, you talking about your interaction with Dave made me realize just how important bird networks are for these things. Dave says that, and it makes you do something different in the house. And then we see a Harris's sparrow in our yard at the beginning of COVID, and what happens? It goes out on all the bird chats, and all of a sudden there's a lot more people paying attention. And that was our socialization, actually, in our yard. We had a couple of really good birds in our yard at the beginning of COVID, which were quite charming and fun. And everybody came outside to look at the birds. And so we had a social encounter at a time when we were pretty isolated, which, these networks are so important. Also, well, I guess they also can drive things to extinction with over photographing of rare birds in Scots, England, for example. But
well, those are just vagrants. I mean, with rusty blackbird, that's one of those birds that, for instance, in the Evanston North Shore Bird Chat, which is just this thing where a messaging app that we use to talk about good records. Everybody loves to put rusty blackbirds in there, and they should. It's a neat thing to find some rusty blackbirds someplace.
Well, I think that might be getting close on time. Was there anything else on rusty blackbird we want to discuss?
No, I just say to people, once you get to know that bird, go out and look for them and put it into eBird, because this is a situation where citizen scientists can definitely make a big difference, and there's real desire to get more data on the movement patterns of that bird.
All right, so our mailbag question. So this is from Kyle from Glen Ellen, Illinois, and Kyle says, "Is the big year real? Do you know anyone that competed in it? Really enjoyed the movie." And so, yes, I can say it is in fact real because I've read the book. It's not just the movie. But
it's for sure real, and it's a little hint into what the birding community can be like that you wouldn't know. So there's a lot of reality in it for ornithologists, for sure. Underneath the bizarreness of the story, the competition to see who sees the most, the undermining of other people potentially in seeing them. So that all exists under the surface of bird watching. But you also see the beauty in that too, in terms of them helping each other find these birds and not being exclusive about it, which is always a kind of a dilemma, right? If you're competing. And it's not like there's millions of dollars at stake, right? This is only pride of doing something. It's not a get rich over a year scheme or anything of the sort. So I saw a lot of our friends and colleagues watching that movie. People do big years in lots of different ways too, not just around the world as this movie showed, but local big year. How many birds can you see in Illinois? Someone who's been associated with the museum did that not too long ago to see in the most things he could see in Illinois, which is, it's a fun thing for people to do, I think.
And I'd say that one thing I liked about the movie is it got a little bit into the spectrum of people that are interested in birds. And right. And so you can be really well off and have money to go all over the place, or you can just be really passionate birds, have no money, but scramble to get places and still, see a lot of birds.
Do really well. Yeah.
One of the places that they focus on in the movie is the island of Attu, which has long been one of the best place to go for Asian migrants during migration. And I grew up in a family with my older brother and my dad being incredibly passionate birders, and both of them have been out to Attu to do that. And it's an island basically south of Russia, which is why it gets so many Russian migrants. And it's an old military base, which I think now they've actually closed it off so that it's much harder to get to on a regular basis. But if you wanted to do a big year in North America, you basically had to go to Attu and then hope that the weather was good and you got some good migrants when you were there. And so there are always
you could be fogged in and see nothing, as the movie kind of gets at, right? About how hard and the effects of weather on whether you can get there or not. And if you're a few hours in a plane, a few hours later than someone else, that could be the difference between your plane landing or not landing.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really like about that is that they had an actual, one of the people who was part of the story of this book and turning into a movie, this Greg Miller, they had him as a consultant. So the movie has a lot more factual basis than things often do. So you don't hear Rent-Its playing in Little House on the Prairie kind of things, because they had an actual person who knew what they were talking about. So the bird aspects of this are correct. You don't hear common loons being played in Antarctica, or kookaburras being played in North America, for example, which are things you would hear in soundtracks of other movies that make bird watchers crazy, right? You listen to these things. Some people get so distracted they can't watch the movie because it makes them just lose their minds. But in this case, they actually had someone who was an expert and who was part of this whole storytelling process to be part of their experts.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
I mean, I'd say that part of me was, we didn't go see it till well after it was out. And part of it was, I wasn't sure how much I was going to enjoy it. And I thought it was really well done.
Oh yeah. My grandparents went to like a book signing and met Mark Obmascik, the author, back when the book came out. And so I had like a signed copy from him for a while. And it's funny, this is like totally separate, but my mom does like used to work like customer service stuff at this outdoor apparel company, and Mark Obmascik would write just the customer service people saying how much he liked their gear or whatever. And so my mom would get these emails, and she knew it was from Mark Obmascik, but she never wanted to reply and be like, hey, I'm a huge fan, and like reveal who she was. She had to stay in her but she was like, he wrote like the most like thoughtful emails, like you could tell he's this professional writer. Like she would like read these emails of him so and just be like, oh, this is incredible.
That's so cool.
I thought that was funny.
That's awesome.
That's really sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Kyle, for writing that.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. Yep. It's definitely, as you get interested in birding, it's one of those books that you should definitely check out. Yeah. And it's a great read.
And the movie will be completely different to you once you've become a bird watcher or read the book, right? So
yeah.
So it's kind of a niche market, and that's probably why it didn't do so well at the box office. But it did really well in birding circles.
And bird people, yeah.
All right. Well, John, Shannon, you want to close it out on this one?
Sure. Again, Rusty Blackbird is a perfect example of why citizen science matters so much. And finishing it off with that mailbag question from the big year highlights that, every species can be counted if you're doing something like that, including Rusty Blackbird.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us this week. We appreciate all of you for listening. Check out our socials on Instagram, TikTok, and we are excited to announce that we are now on Blue Sky Social as well. If you have a question for us, you can reach us at podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. Okay, love you all. See you next week.